You're standing on a ridge in southern Africa, 74,000 years ago. The sky has been gray for months. Nothing is blooming. The animals around you are thin, starving, dying before you can even hunt them. Somewhere behind you, a volcano called Toba has just detonated, with roughly 10,000 times the force of Mount St. Helens. You didn't cause this. You can't stop it. And by some estimates, this single event nearly erased your entire species from the planet. Right now, you're reading this on a device that didn't exist a generation ago, in a climate-controlled room with food a few steps away. Your ancestors had none of that. No stored grain, no walls, no certainty that tomorrow's weather wouldn't kill them. So how did they survive? How did a slow, weak, hairless primate outlast ice ages, supervolcanoes, and a planet that seemed determined to kill it, while cousins like the Neanderthals eventually vanished? The answer isn't strength. It isn't luck, either. Not entirely. It's something stranger. Everyone assumes early humans survived because they were tougher than everything else out there. The truth is closer to the opposite. Compared to a cave lion or a woolly rhino, you were slow, soft-skinned, and poorly armed. The real advantage was somewhere else entirely. Start with the volcano. In 2018, researchers led by Curtis Moran at Arizona State University published findings from Pinnacle Point on South Africa's southern coast. They found archaeological layers spanning the Toba eruption itself, roughly 74,000 years ago. The evidence showed people didn't just survive the eruption. They kept living at the site, harvesting shellfish straight through it. One site. Thousands of years of continuous occupation. The takeaway, while inland ecosystems collapsed, a small strip of coastline stayed productive enough to keep a population alive. So what actually saved them? Not a bunker, not a weapon, a tide table. Shellfish don't run away. They don't migrate with the seasons. They sit in the same rocks, exposed twice a day by the tides, whether the sky is gray or blue. While antelope herds inland were starving and thinning out, the people at Pinnacle Point had a food source that didn't care what the volcano was doing. A predictable meal, twice a day, rain or ash. That's twist number one. The species that conquered the planet may have owed its survival, at a critical moment, to something as unglamorous as a clam. But surviving one eruption doesn't explain surviving everything else. So what about the long game? The tens of thousands of years after? Here's where the genetics get strange. A 2023 study, published in the journal Science, led by researcher Wangji Hu and colleagues, analyzed the genomes of over 3,100 living people to reconstruct ancient population size. Their model suggested that between roughly 813,000 and 930,000 years ago, the ancestral human population crashed to somewhere around 1,300 breeding individuals for well over 100,000 years. By the study's estimate, close to 98. 7% of the ancestral population was wiped out. For context, that's a smaller founding group than most modern zoos would consider viable for a single endangered species. So what changed? Here's where it gets strange. Nobody fully knows what caused that crash, but something about surviving it, generation after generation, in numbers that small, may have shaped what came after. A population that thin can't afford much internal conflict. It has to share, it has to cooperate, or it has nothing left to lose. That's the second twist. The bottleneck wasn't just a near-death experience for the species, it may have been a filter, quietly selecting for the exact social behaviors that would matter later. Now compare that to the Neanderthals, because for a long time, they were doing just fine, arguably better equipped for Ice Age Europe than incoming Homo sapiens. A 2026 study out of Friedrich Alexander Universität Erlangen-Nuremberg, led by researcher Thorsten Uthmeier, used ancient DNA, including a fetus from the Sesselfelsgrot cave in Germany, to date a severe Neanderthal genetic bottleneck to around 65,000 years ago. The population's geographic range and genetic diversity collapsed sharply. Then, starting around 45,000 years ago, their numbers entered a final, steep decline, ending in extinction roughly 3,000 years later. One detail stands out. Uthmeier's team pointed to something beyond climate or competition. Differences in the size and density of Neanderthal social networks compared to incoming modern humans. Smaller networks, fewer connections between distant groups, less genetic and cultural exchange when a crisis hit. So here's the third twist, and it's the one that undercuts almost everything you assumed at the start of this video. Homo sapiens didn't outhunt the Neanderthals. Neanderthals had bigger brains relative to some measures, comparable tools, and had already survived Europe's brutal winters for over 300,000 years before modern humans arrived. What Homo sapiens seems to have had, instead, was reach. Wider social networks stretching across greater distances, trading resources, ideas, and mates between groups that had never met. A rock at Pinnacle Point can't explain that on its own. Genomes reconstructed from thousands of living people can't fully explain it either. But put them side by side, and a pattern starts to surface. So what's the deeper answer underneath all of it? It was never really about surviving one eruption, or one ice age, or one collapse. It was about a species that kept finding a way to stay connected to more people than the disaster in front of it could reach. A volcano can flatten one coastline. It can't flatten a network spread across a continent. A famine can empty one valley. It can't empty every valley at once, if the people in each one are still trading with the next. Everyone assumes the story of human survival is a story about individual toughness, the strongest hunter, the sharpest spear. The truth is that toughness explains almost none of it. Connection does. You're standing on that ridge again, watching the gray sky. Except now you know something the person standing there didn't. They weren't going to make it alone. None of your ancestors were. What kept the species alive wasn't a stronger body. It was a wider circle. One person passing a resource, a technique, a mate, to another person they'd never have survived without. The real weapon was never fire, or flint, or force. It was each other. And every one of us alive today is, quite literally, the descendant of the ones who never stopped reaching for the next person over the hill.